Good evening, and welcome back to Shadow Whisper. Tonight, we set sail into darkness, uncovering the 6 most disturbing true cruise ship horror stories ever told. Cruise ships promise luxury, safety, and endless horizons. But when the sea stretches black on all sides, when the walls of your cabin feel too close, paradise can turn into a prison. These are not myths. They are real accounts, pulled from news reports, investigations, and the haunting words of survivors who swore they would never step on a ship again. Passengers who vanished into thin air. Cabins that seemed to breathe. Storms that carried voices no human throat could make. What makes these stories so chilling is not the ocean itself, but what waits inside these floating cities when the lights dim and the silence grows too heavy. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Shadow Whisper for more true horror that follows you long after the video ends. And hit the bell icon, so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now take a deep breath and step aboard. The voyage begins, but not every passenger who leaves the port will return. We boarded the ship with rings still shining on our fingers, and for the first 3 nights I thought life had finally given me everything I ever wanted. Claire and I danced in the atrium beneath chandeliers, drank champagne on the deck until the wind made us giddy, and slept tangled together in a cabin that smelled of salt and safety. She kept a little journal by the bedside table, writing each night about how lucky we were, how the ocean itself felt like it was carrying us into the future. I believed her. I wanted to. But on the 4th night, the ocean stopped feeling like an ally. The storm came without warning. Waves slammed the windows of the dining hall hard enough to rattle the glasses in their racks. The lights flickered. The floor tilted beneath our feet, and even though the crew smiled and said it was all routine, I could see the truth in their eyes. Claire clutched my hand and whispered that she wanted to go back to our room. I kissed her forehead, tried to make a joke of it, but I was relieved when the cabin door closed behind us. That relief didn't last long. The room was freezing, like we'd walked into a meat locker. I checked the thermostat. It was set to off. I turned the dial, twisted the knob, pressed the buttons, but nothing changed. Claire laughed nervously, said maybe the cabin was haunted. I tried to laugh with her, but the smell hit me next. Stronger than usual, sharper. Salt water. It was in the carpet, in the walls, in my lungs. And when Claire finally drifted into sleep, I lay awake and listened. That's when I heard it. Water. Not outside the window. Inside. It was faint, but it was there. A slow, steady sloshing beneath the bed. I slid out of the sheets, crouched down, and lifted the blanket. My heart pounded in my ears as I expected to see a leak, a puddle, something wet. But there was nothing. Just carpet, dry and clean. Still, the sound continued, rhythmic, patient, as though waves were rolling against the hull from inside our room. I told myself it was nerves, that the storm had gotten into my head. I crawled back beside Claire, kissed her shoulder, tried to sleep. When I woke in the morning, she was gone. Her nightgown was folded neatly on the chair. Her journal was still open on the desk. But Claire wasn't anywhere. Not in the bathroom, not on the balcony, not in the hall when I stumbled out screaming her name. The sheets beside me were cold, as if no one had slept there at all. The crew came. They questioned me, searched the corridors, checked the cameras. They showed me the footage. Me and Claire walking into the cabin together at midnight. But nothing after that. No trace of her leaving. I thought I was losing my mind until I came back to the cabin that evening and saw her journal. It was open to a new page, and in her handwriting, ink still glistening wet, 3 words were written. Still at sea. The words in her journal wouldn't leave me alone. Still at sea? I stared at them for what felt like hours, tracing the grooves of her pen strokes with my fingertip. They were hers. I knew her handwriting better than my own. The little loops she left on her S, the way she pressed too hard on the downstrokes. But she hadn't been here to write them. She couldn't have been. I carried the journal to the front desk, my hands shaking so badly I could hardly hold it open. The officer on duty looked at me with the polite detachment of a man who's been trained to soothe drunks. He skimmed the page, then met my eyes with a tired smile. "Maybe she left you a note," he said. "She's gone," I snapped. "You've got cameras everywhere. You know she didn't leave." He glanced at the monitors on the wall. Dozens of screens showing stairwells, lounges, bars, hallways stretching into infinity. "Sometimes the cameras fail," he said. "Sometimes people just slip away. We'll keep searching." But there was no urgency in his voice, no fear, just a rehearsed calm that felt worse than panic. That night I refused to leave the cabin. I sat in the chair with the journal open on my lap, staring at the door, waiting for Claire to walk through it. I left the lights on, every lamp, even the bathroom glow spilling across the carpet. But somewhere past midnight they flickered, just once, just long enough for the air to change. The smell of salt water flooded back, thick and sharp. I gagged on it, choking as if I'd been dragged underwater. The floor vibrated faintly, and I heard the sound again. Waves slapping against the hull, not from outside but beneath my feet. The journal flipped a page on its own. I swear to God I hadn't touched it. The paper lifted, fluttered, and settled open. A new line appeared in the same handwriting as before, curling onto the page letter by letter, though no pen touched it. I sat frozen, breath caught in my chest as if the ship itself were writing through her hand. "Come below." I wanted to run, to storm the captain's quarters, to scream until someone believed me, but my legs wouldn't move. I was caught, anchored by those words, hearing them echo not in my head but in the walls of the room. I must have blacked out. When I opened my eyes, dawn hadn't come. There was no dawn anymore, only the ship cutting through black water under a sky that seemed to stretch forever. I was on the floor beside the bed, the journal clutched to my chest, and on the desk something else waited, her ring, the one she'd slid onto her finger a week ago. It sat alone on the wood, gleaming faintly in the lamplight. I picked it up with shaking hands, but it was warm, not from the lamp. Not from me, warm like it had just come off her finger. I knew then that she hadn't left me, not willingly. She was still on this ship, and the ocean wanted me to follow. I didn't tell anyone about the ring. If the crew could ignore an entire missing woman, what would they do with a husband raving about journals that wrote themselves and jewelry that reappeared on desks? I kept it clenched in my fist until the metal dug into my skin, a secret weight that burned like a promise. The next night, the command returned. Not in ink this time, but in sound. I woke to the shuffle of paper, to the whisper of pages turning though the journal was closed. The air was colder than ever, my breath rising in the dim cabin light, and then I heard her voice, soft, familiar. My wife's voice, drifting from the floor. "Come below." I staggered to my feet, my legs unsteady, the ship swaying gently as though it was trying to rock me toward sleep. But I wasn't dreaming. The words hummed through the carpet, through the walls, through my bones. The command was inside the ship now, threaded into the steel. I slipped into the hallway barefoot, clutching her ring in one hand and the journal in the other. The corridor stretched long and silent, lined with doors that looked suddenly endless. No passengers stirred. No voices rose from behind the walls. Just the hum of engines and the low, steady throb of something deeper. I followed it. Down past the passenger decks, past the dining halls with their chandeliers dimmed, past the crew-only signs I had no right to cross. The ship seemed to part for me. Doors left ajar, stairwells waiting, each one carrying me further into places that smelled of oil and rust and salt. The deeper I went, the louder the sound became. And then I found the door. It was different from the others. Older, riveted, its paint blistered by years of salt spray. No sign marked it, no lock barred it, but the handle was slick with condensation, like it had been pulled from the ocean itself. I reached for it, trembling, and the ring in my hand grew warmer as if urging me on. When the door swung open, the smell hit me first. Salt water. Heavy, choking, filling my lungs with a phantom tide. The passage beyond was narrow, dripping, its walls sweating as though the sea pressed directly against them. My bare feet slapped against cold metal as I stepped forward, lightless but not blind because something deeper than light guided me. The corridor ended at a chamber. It shouldn't have existed. The ship's blueprints couldn't have contained it. Yet there it was, a vast hollow space, ribs of steel curving high above like the skeleton of a whale. And in the center, water pooled black and endless, rippling with no source. Her voice came again, clearer now, echoing across the chamber. Daniel. I dropped the ring. It hit the floor with a sound too loud for its weight, and the water stirred. Shapes shifted just beneath the surface. Pale arms, slender shoulders, hair floating like seaweed. Claire's face rose from the dark, eyes wide, lips trembling as though she were calling me by name. I stumbled forward, every part of me breaking at once. She was alive. She had to be alive. But when I reached the edge of the pool, I froze. Her hand broke the surface, reaching for me, but it wasn't her hand anymore. The skin was bloated, fingers long and webbed, nails blackened. Her smile stretched too wide, her voice layered with others whispering in unison, still at sea. And before I could scream, the ship lurched. The lights overhead flared, then died, plunging everything into black. It was the kind of night when the sea looked more like glass than water, stretched smooth beneath a sky so black it seemed endless. The cruise had been calm all week, the kind of trip travel brochures promised. Sun, laughter, champagne flutes clinking against railings. No one on board had any reason to suspect that the ship itself was about to swallow someone whole. Her name was Evelyn Hart, 32 years old, traveling alone for the first time in her life. The divorce papers had been signed 3 months earlier, and this cruise was meant to be a fresh start. A week to herself, no demands, no expectations, only the wide horizon and the hum of the ocean. Fellow passengers described her as kind, quiet, polite. She read books by the pool, joined excursions when invited, but mostly she wandered the decks with the gentle curiosity of someone trying to remember who they were. On the 5th night, she was seen in the lounge. She ordered one drink, gin with a twist of lime, and spoke for nearly an hour with a couple seated nearby. She laughed. She smiled. Nothing about her suggested despair or darkness. Just after midnight, she excused herself, said she wanted some air before bed. That was the last time anyone heard her voice. The cameras showed her moving down the corridor, her footsteps calm, her dress swaying softly with the roll of the ship. She pushed through the glass doors and stepped onto the outer deck. She paused at the railing, gazing out into the dark. For a moment she leaned forward as if listening, though the sea was silent. Then she turned and walked deeper along the deck, toward a section where the cameras ended. She never returned. Her cabin was checked the next morning. The bed was made, her suitcase neatly zipped, her book placed open-faced on the table, a bookmark resting in the crease. No sign of panic, no sign of preparation. It was as though she had stepped out for air and dissolved into the night. The ship scoured the waters. Crew searched every corridor, every locked door, every blind spot. No splash had been heard, no alarms triggered, no life jackets missing. And yet Evelyn Hart had simply ceased to exist. The strangest detail came later when the couple she had spoken to in the lounge gave their statement. They swore she hadn't been drinking alone. They swore she had been joined by another woman, tall, pale, dressed in gray. But the cameras showed Evelyn alone at the bar. And when authorities checked the passenger list, they confirmed what the couple already feared. No such woman had ever been on board. By the second day of the search, the mood on board had shifted. Passengers whispered in corners, their laughter muted, their eyes flicking toward the sea as though it might swallow them too. The official announcements insisted Evelyn had likely gone overboard, that she had chosen to jump or slipped in the night. But no one believed it. The sea had been calm, the rails high, the cameras clear. There had been no splash, No scream, no ripple on the glassy water. The couple who had last spoken with her insisted on their story, that she had been smiling, hopeful, and never alone. They described the woman in gray in detail, her pale hands folded neatly on the table, her eyes too large for her face. A passenger manifest was printed and passed around. The couple went name by name, face by face, but none matched. The crew grew impatient, brushing them off as confused or mistaken. Yet more and more passengers began to whisper that they too had seen her. A woman in gray walking the corridors late at night, never speaking, never meeting a gaze for long. On the third night after Evelyn's disappearance, a bartender cleaning glasses near midnight glanced up and froze. A woman stood at the far end of the lounge dressed in pale gray, her face half in shadow. He swore he recognized her from the description. When he called out, she turned and he saw that her eyes were not just large, they were glassy, reflecting the dim light without depth, like mirrors filled with water. Then she vanished into the stairwell. The next morning, the bartender said nothing, but that night he locked the doors of the lounge early, leaving drinks unfinished on tables. Passengers began to claim Evelyn herself hadn't left. A group of teenagers swore they saw her standing on the upper deck after midnight, hair blown wild by the wind, her hands gripping the rail. When they shouted to her, she turned, her lips moving, but her voice was drowned by the engines. They ran for the crew, but by the time they returned, the deck was empty. One woman, older, traveling alone, broke down in tears during dinner on the sixth night. She whispered that she had woken in her cabin to find Evelyn sitting in the chair by her bed, dripping seawater onto the carpet. Her mouth was moving soundlessly, as if still carrying on a conversation from the lounge. The woman blinked when the chair was empty, only a puddle of brine left behind. The captain tightened control. Passengers were told Evelyn had been lost to the sea, her fate tragic but clear. Security swept every corner of the ship, shutting down talk of a woman in gray, brushing away stories of dripping footprints in corridors. But the silence of authority only deepened the unease. The stories spread faster, whispers clinging to the walls like mildew. And on the seventh night, another passenger vanished, not from the corridors, not from the deck, from her bed. Her husband woke in the dark to the sound of the door clicking shut. He thought she had gone for air, but when he followed, the corridor was empty. The camera showed her stepping into the hall at 2:13 a.m., her nightgown pale as she turned toward the outer deck. Then nothing, just like Evelyn. By the eighth night, the ship no longer felt like a holiday. The music in the lounges seemed too loud, the laughter forced. People clutched their drinks like anchors, refusing to go out on deck after sunset. Cabins were locked from the inside, curtains drawn tight, though more than one passenger swore they woke to find theirs pulled back, the ocean staring in. The whispers never stopped. Evelyn's name clung to the air like smoke. Some swore she had been seen in the buffet line, head bent, hair wet, spooning food onto a plate that she never ate. Others claimed to hear her pacing the hall outside their rooms, a soft shuffle of bare feet in the hours before dawn. Always just out of reach, always gone when the doors opened. The woman in gray appeared again. This time it was a young man on the sun deck who saw her. He'd slipped out for a cigarette after curfew, the ship cutting through black waters below. He described her as tall and pale, standing near the railing where Evelyn had last been seen. She turned her head toward him, and though her lips never moved, her voice slid directly into his mind, clear and cold. She walked onto the deck, and was never seen again. The man dropped his cigarette, stumbled backward, and swore he felt hands brush his shoulders as if pushing him toward the edge. He ran, gasping, back inside, and when security returned with him minutes later, there was nothing. No woman, no footprints, only salt water smeared across the railing, slick and shining beneath the deck lights. The second missing passenger's husband demanded answers. He shouted at the captain in the dining hall, pounding his fists on the table until the crew dragged him away. But what could the captain say? He had no explanation. 2 vanishings in the same week, the same deck, the same silence. He told the passengers what they already knew was a lie, that the sea had taken them. On the 9th night, a storm blew in, rain lashing the decks, wind screaming through the stairwells. Passengers huddled in their cabins, but the crew on duty swore they saw figures walking calmly through the storm. A woman in gray, and beside her, Evelyn Hart. Hair plastered to her face, dress dripping with seawater, her expression calm, her steps unhurried. The 2 of them moved side by side until they reached the very edge of the deck. When lightning struck, both were gone. The ship docked days later. Officials met it at port, their reports written in stiff language, tragic accidents at sea. But those who sailed on that voyage still whisper the truth. Evelyn didn't leave. The woman in gray didn't either. And on some nights, when the ocean lies flat and the decks are empty, new passengers vanish the same way. No splash, no scream. Just the silence of the sea and the feeling that someone is still walking beside you unseen. The night the power died, it felt like the ship blinked and forgot to open its eyes again. 1 second the chandeliers glowed, the slot machines sang. Waiters moved through the atrium with trays of glass. The next, everything collapsed into a hard, suffocating dark. The generators should have coughed to life. They didn't. The silence that followed wasn't silence at all, but a pressure, a sealed lid quiet that made our ears ring. People laughed at first, the nervous kind, voices bobbing like lifebuoys. Then the laughter cracked. Someone cried out from an elevator. Somewhere a glass hit the floor and did not shatter. Either the carpet caught it or the dark swallowed the sound. Emergency lighting limped on in weak red strips along the baseboards, turning faces into masks and corridors into veins. Crew passed word hand to hand that it was temporary. A hiccup, a switch. We believed them until the air staled and the ship's hum dwindled to a pulse you could not quite feel. The pool decks turned into roofs over black water. Doors locked with electronic size and could not be convinced to open again. In the casino, 100 screens froze mid-spin and people stared, each of us trapped in whatever symbol the last seconds had given us. There was a smell then, a slow bloom of heat and human breath and something metallic rising from the belly of the ship. We were a city without windows at sea. The crew tried to separate us by deck to keep calm in boxes, but fear seeps. It finds the cracks. On the promenade, a woman pounded her fists against a shuttered bar until her knuckles bled. Over the lobby, the velvet curtain at the theater breathed as though something stood behind it, inhaling the room. A child's voice echoed down a stairwell, thin as thread. "Mommy?" The steps sent it back and forth until no one could tell where it began. The captain's announcement arrived as a warped ghost, swallowed by static, more tremor than language. Temporary.
Technical.
Remain in cabins. Safety. There is nothing safe about darkness at sea. Cabins that had been snug turned small and airless. People lit phones and swore the screens dimmed faster than they ever had, like the ship was drinking from their light. Doors that had always opened for anyone with a key card suddenly remembered who they preferred. Locks that should have yielded stayed stubborn. We learned the ship's true shape then. Not the good-natured hotel it pretended to be, but a grated spine and a maze of ribs and corridors that didn't quite map the way the brochures promised. Crew-only doors swung ajar with a little coaxing. Others held like jaws. I was on the service deck with 3 strangers when the stairwell lights went out a second time. We had left our cabins for air and found none. The heat changed. Not warmer, not cooler, thicker. The smell of brine threaded the ducts. In the red gloom, a steward turned his wrist to check the time and found a smear of sea salt crusted across his watch face. We were not near the open decks. The ocean had come to us anyway. Someone banged on the elevator from inside again, 4 precise blows. A voice said very calmly, "We're between floors." The doors parted half an inch. We saw an eye in the seam, glossy and unblinking, reflecting our little band like a captured photograph. We pried at the panels with fingers and cutlery and a broken butter knife. The crack widened, then stopped, as if the car were braced by hands on the other side. The voice inside did not panic. It did not tire. It repeated the same sentence with a metronome's patience. "We're between floors." Only later, when the power came back, did we start to wonder if we had ever heard lungs behind that steadiness. In the atrium, the piano began to play. No musician sat at it. Keys moved with the obedience of a puppet's limbs, slow and deliberate. A waltz, but the tempo wrong, the melody thinned to wire. People turned their faces toward it like plants to light, and for a moment their fear looked like listening. Then the music stopped as if a hand had pressed against the strings. The ship drifted. We stopped believing the crew when we realized the corridors were longer. The emergency strips on the floor ran on, red lines into a throat. You could walk them for minutes and end up beside the same door, the same stain in the carpet, the same framed print of a harbor you had never seen. The numbers on the walls blinked. 7 became 17, 17 became 71. The theater curtain breathed again. Somewhere above us, footsteps crossed a deck with the slow certainty of someone who had never once needed light to find their way. Down in the kitchens, a man struck a match. It flared as if greedily and went out without smoke. He did it again. And again. The third time the flame held small and fierce and cast a ring of gold over steel countertops and stacked plates. In that circle, the steam curling from a stockpot stilled, as if arrested mid-rise. The man leaned closer and saw that it wasn't steam at all, but a strand of hair floating slowly up from the pot, long and brown and slick with broth. He dropped the match and the dark returned with a sound like a wave clapping shut. The ship listed a degree or two and the crowd in the atrium moved as one organism, a shift of weight and breath. Somewhere a door let the sea in with a cough. We felt it in the soles of our feet more than we heard it. The floating city had become a single room, and every wall of it was a locked door. When the first scream cut the dark, it came from outside. The scream was high and raw, shredding the silence as if the dark itself had been torn open. It came from the upper deck, out where the rain smacked the glass doors and the black water leaned against steel. People froze, clutched each other, eyes tilting toward the sound. For a second, no one moved. Then the rush began. A surge of bodies pressing toward the stairwells, each person desperate to see but terrified of finding out. I moved with them, shoulder to shoulder, hearts thudding in sync. The red emergency strips along the floor barely lit our path, but we followed them upward like veins. The scream had stopped, but its echo clung, trembling down the corridors. When we reached the deck doors, the crew barred our way. They shouted orders, their faces washed crimson by the emergency light. Stay inside. Stay calm. Calm was gone. Calm had drowned. The doors rattled against fists. Passengers screamed at the crew, demanded answers, demanded light, demanded safety. But behind the shouts, I heard something else. A wet dragging sound just beyond the glass. Not footsteps, not rain. Something heavier, slower, like fabric soaked in brine being pulled across the boards. The doors burst open. Wind punched into us, salt stinging our eyes, the storm chewing at our clothes. We spilled onto the deck, a knot of terrified bodies against a horizon we couldn't see. And then we did see it, the source of the scream. By the starboard rail, a figure slumped forward, arms draped like ropes, head bent low. A man, or what had once been a man. His clothes sagged with seawater, skin pale and blistered, lips drawn back in a grin that had nothing of joy in it. His eyes rolled white, not searching, not seeing. The body leaned against the railing as if cradled by the sea itself. Then the ship rolled, and with a sound like tearing fabric, he toppled into the black. There was no splash. He fell into silence, vanishing as though the water had opened a mouth to swallow him whole. The crowd broke. People ran for the stairwells, for cabins, for anywhere that might still feel solid. But the red lights flickered and the ship groaned, long and low, as though pleased. I staggered back inside with the rest, but I kept hearing that wet dragging, following us down the corridors. The air thickened further. Hot, wet, difficult to swallow. In the atrium, condensation dripped from the ceiling, though no pipes ran above. Children cried, their parents pulling them close, whispering prayers. Crew members tried to hand out flashlights, but half of them flickered, dimmed, died in trembling hands, and then, as if to remind us we were trapped, the locks engaged again. Every door clanged shut, cabins sealed, hallways cut off. Even the stairwells shuddered as if the ship itself had grown tired of us moving freely. We tried handles, shoved at doors, kicked until our toes cracked. Nothing gave. The captain's voice returned, warped and broken over the speakers. Remain calm. The situation is under control. But the words didn't sound like his anymore. They were slower, stretched thin, as if the sea had borrowed his voice and repeated it back wrong. In the casino, a man screamed that the walls were moving. We ran to him, and I swear to you he was right. The wallpaper along one side of the room was soaked through, bulging outward, swelling like lungs filling with air. With each heave, salt water seeped through, dribbling down the pattern in long rivulets. Someone reached out, touched it, and the wall shivered beneath their palm. They recoiled as if burned, their hand dripping brine. We were no longer passengers, we were prisoners. The ship was alive, and it was breathing. The dark held us for what felt like days, though the clocks had all stopped. Phones dimmed and died. Watches refused to tick. We lived by the slow rhythm of our own breath, pressed together in halls that had grown too long, in cabins that smelled of rot. Then one morning, if it was morning at all, the ship stilled. The engines did not return, but the sway of the sea softened until we realized we were no longer moving. When the shutters groaned open at last, light flooded the atrium. Not electric light, daylight. Harsh and colorless, washing us pale. Passengers staggered onto the outer decks, blinking, clutching their children, their coats, each other. We expected open sea. Instead, we saw land. An island loomed only yards away, a jagged smear of rock and forest against the horizon. But no map showed it, no itinerary had marked it. The crew whispered it didn't exist, though their voices broke when they said it. The shoreline was black sand, shining wet like obsidian, and trees leaned too closely together, their branches twisted like hands frozen mid-prayer. Relief washed through the crowd like oxygen. People cried. Some clapped. Anything that wasn't ocean felt like salvation. But salvation doesn't whisper. This island did. From the tree line rose a low sound, half breath, half word, like 1,000 voices buried in the sand speaking all at once. The wind should have carried the scent of pine, of earth. Instead it smelled of brine, sharp and raw, as if the sea itself had grown lungs. The captain insisted no one disembark. He barked orders into the crowd, his face slick with sweat, but panic overrode command. A gangplank was lowered, and one by one, passengers stumbled onto the black sand. Children darted ahead, their laughter brittle in the air. Parents followed, some ran. Some knelt and pressed their faces to the earth, sobbing, thanking a god who had not come. But the island was not still. The sand shifted beneath their feet, dark grains crawling as if alive. The trees swayed, though no wind touched them. And the voices, those whispering voices, grew louder, sharper, until they became words clear enough for all of us on deck to hear. Stay. Some passengers froze where they stood, heads tilting back, eyes rolling white. Others turned toward the forest, their movements jerky, uncoordinated, as if guided by strings. They stepped between the trees without looking back. Minutes passed, then hours. They didn't return. Those who remained on the beach began to sink. Slowly at first, ankles swallowed by the black sand, then thighs, then hips, their screams cutting through the whispers. We watched from the ship as they reached upward, clawing at the air, but the sand rose higher, smoother until only faces remained. Then the tide came in, a single wave folding over them, and the beach was empty. The captain ordered the gangplank raised. The crew obeyed, their hands trembling, their eyes refusing to meet ours. The ship shuddered, the engines coughed, and we pulled away from the island. None of us spoke. None of us breathed too loudly. We only stared at the trees where pale figures now stood in the shadows. Too many to count, their eyes glassy, their hands dripping salt water, watching us drift. When the horizon finally swallowed the island, we prayed it had never been real, that maybe it was madness, a trick, a fever in the dark. But on the final day of the voyage, when we docked at port, the manifest was printed again, and alongside our names in neat black rows was the name of every passenger who had stepped onto that shore, not marked as lost, not marked as dead, just one word beside them: home. Every ship has one cabin whispered about by the crew. The number changes, the stories shift, but the warnings remain the same. Don't book it, don't sleep in it, don't even linger in the hall outside too long. On this ship, that cabin was 923. It looked like any other. A narrow steel door, the same beige carpet leading up to it, the same hum of pipes behind the walls. To passengers, there was nothing remarkable about it. But the crew knew. They spoke in low voices about the guests who had checked into 923 and never made it through a full voyage. Some left after a night, pale and shaken, demanding to be moved. Others never left at all. The records were sparse, but what remained told a grim pattern. A young woman found unresponsive in her bed. No cause of death determined. A man discovered locked inside the bathroom, his fingernails torn to the quick from scratching at the door. A couple who booked the room together, but only one who walked off the ship, unable to explain what had happened during the night. The official reports always gave vague explanations. Heart failure, stress, misadventure. But the cabin's maids knew better. They said the room never felt empty, even when no one was booked. They heard faint knocks from inside as they passed. Sometimes when the lights flickered in the corridor, the handle of 923 turned slowly on its own. One stewardess told her story only once, her voice shaking. She said she entered the cabin to clean between voyages and found the mirror fogged over. Though the bathroom had been unused for days, she reached to wipe it and froze. The fog cleared just enough for her to see a face, not her own, staring back at her. Pale, wet, with eyes that never blinked, she dropped her cloth and fled, refusing to ever step inside again. Still, the cabin continued to be booked. People don't listen to warnings when they think they're paying for luxury. And one season, a woman named Julia Parker checked in. Traveling alone, eager for peace after years of caring for her sick mother, Julia welcomed the quiet. She told other passengers she found the ship comforting, the gentle rocking of the waves soothing. She spent her first day exploring the decks, dining in the lounge, and when she returned to her cabin that night, she told herself the stories were just rumors. But sleep in 923 did not come easily. The air felt too heavy, the shadows in the corners too deep. She left the bathroom light on. The door cracked just enough to let a faint glow spill across the carpet. Still, as she drifted towards sleep, she felt it. The weight of someone else in the room just at the edge of her vision. When she turned to look, the chair by the desk wasn't empty anymore. Julia told herself it was a trick of half sleep, the way shadows bend and shift when exhaustion plays with the mind. She blinked hard, rubbed her eyes, and when she looked again, the chair by the desk was empty. Just fabric, just wood, nothing else, but the air hadn't lightened. It still pressed against her chest, still held that quiet density that told her she wasn't alone. She pulled the sheets tighter around her body and left the lamp on, her gaze fixed on the bathroom door where light spilled in a faint golden sliver. Somewhere in the night, Julia woke to the sound of water, not the steady hum of pipes, not the distant slosh of waves. This was closer. A dripping sound, steady and slow, coming from the bathroom. She sat up, heart thundering, and listened. Each drop echoed like it had fallen into something vast. She slid out of bed, crossed the carpet in bare feet, and pressed her hand to the bathroom door. The light was still on, but the air that leaked through the crack was cold. She pushed the door open. The mirror was fogged over, thick with condensation. Drops of water streaked down the glass as though someone had stood there breathing hard only seconds before. Julia reached for the sink, fumbling for the faucet, but when her eyes rose to the mirror, her breath caught. There was a figure behind her. Tall, thin. Its face pale, dripping, the eyes glassy and black. It stood directly in the center of the reflection, close enough that she swore she felt its breath on her neck. But when she spun around, the bathroom was empty. Only tile, only silence. She backed out quickly, slamming the door, clutching her chest as if the sound of her heart might draw it nearer. For the rest of the night she sat awake, staring at the chair, at the bathroom door, at every corner of the room where the shadows pooled too deep. She swore she heard whispering, faint and wet like words spoken underwater. By morning she thought she might leave the cabin, go to the front desk, demand another room. But when she stepped into the corridor, the air seemed to shift, pulling her gaze down toward the far end. A woman stood there facing away, her dress gray and dripping, her hair hanging limp. Julia opened her mouth to call out, to ask if she was all right, but the woman moved. Not walking, gliding. Down the hall, silent, vanishing around the corner. Julia hurried after her. Bare feet cold on the carpet, but when she turned the corner, the hall was empty. Only silence, only the hum of the ship. The woman was gone. Passengers whispered about her later that day. Some claimed Julia was seen pacing the empty deck after midnight, speaking softly as though to someone only she could see. Others swore they spotted her standing by the rail with another woman. Both of them pale, both dripping with seawater, neither speaking. And when asked about it, Julia said nothing. She just stared out at the horizon, her eyes glassy, her hands trembling, and whispered the same words Evelyn Hart had spoken days earlier. She walked onto the deck and was never seen again. Julia's last night in cabin 923 began like all the others, with her promising herself she would not be afraid. She poured a glass of wine, opened her journal, and told herself the stories meant nothing. The ship was full of voices, full of faces. Shadows played tricks, mirrors fogged. She was just tired, that's all. But the ship had its own rhythm that night. The engines throbbed deeper, slower, as if the voyage had shifted into some other current. Julia tried to write, but the words blurred, her hand trembling with each pulse in the floor. She set her pen down, stood, and froze. The chair by the desk was occupied again. Not just a shadow this time. A woman sat there, her hair slick with seawater, her skin bloated and pale, her dress a washed-out gray that clung wet against her frame. Her head tilted toward Julia slowly, too slowly, and when her eyes lifted, they were bottomless. Black glass filled with a reflection that wasn't Julia's own. Julia stumbled back against the wall, breath caught, unable to scream. The figure rose, water dripping steadily onto the carpet, darkening the fibers with each step. It crossed the room without sound, without effort, until it stood in front of the bathroom door. Then, without touching it, the door swung open. The mirror was already fogged. Julia fled. She tore down the corridor barefoot, clutching her chest, her nightgown plastered with sweat. Passengers later said they saw her bolt up the stairs, pale as the moon, her eyes wide with something more than fear. She didn't stop until she reached the outer deck, the storm wind cutting through her hair. Crew members on duty swore they saw her standing at the rail, whispering to someone who wasn't there. Some thought she was speaking to herself. Some swore they saw a second figure beside her, another woman, taller, dripping, her face hidden in her hair. They shouted for Julia to come back inside, but the words never seemed to reach her. Lightning flared, and for a single moment everyone saw it. Two women side by side at the railing, one in pale gray, her face bloated and wet. The other, Julia, her expression serene, her lips moving soundlessly. When the sky went dark again, only the rail remained. Her cabin was checked the next morning. The bed was made, the wine glass empty, her journal open on the desk. But where her signature should have been on the last page, only 2 words were written in a damp scrawl that soaked the paper through. Room taken. Cabin 923 was sealed after that voyage. The number was painted over, the door left locked. Passengers walk past it even now, never questioning why the hall seems longer than the maps suggest. But the crew still whisper about the empty deck at night, and the woman who glides across it, dripping, always pausing by one door before she disappears again. Cabin 923, the one where passengers check in, but never really leave. Every passenger knows the first rule of a cruise: your cabin is your sanctuary. It may be small, but it's yours. A place to shut out the noise of the ship, the laughter of strangers, the endless throb of the engines. Behind the locked door, you should be safe. That's what they tell you. For one family on a late summer voyage through the Mediterranean, that illusion didn't last long. The parents, Greg and Melissa, had saved for years to take their 2 children, Emily and James, on their first cruise. The cabin was tight but comfortable. 2 twin beds for the kids, a queen for the parents, a little balcony where the sea stretched infinite and calm. The first night was uneventful. They unpacked, ordered room service, slept to the steady rocking of the waves. On the second night, Melissa woke around 3 a.m. to a sound she couldn't place. The door handle was rattling. Not violently, not as though someone was locked out, but slowly, steadily, as though whoever held it wasn't trying to get in, just testing. She froze. Greg snored beside her. The kids breathed softly from their beds. The handle stopped. She told herself it had been a dream, a trick of engines vibrating through the metal. But in the morning she saw faint scratches around the lock, tiny grooves that hadn't been there the day before. That evening, she reported it to the crew. They assured her it was nothing. Doors swell with the salt air, one steward said. Metal contracts and expands. It makes noise. But when Melissa pressed, the steward's smile faltered. For just a second, his eyes shifted to the cabin number on her keycard and widened. Cabin 616. Later that night, Melissa locked the door herself, double-checking. Tugging hard to make sure it was sealed, she placed a chair against it for good measure. Then she lay awake long after the others slept, her ears straining in the dark. At 3:12 a.m. the handle rattled again, and this time the chair scraped against the floor. The chair shouldn't have moved. Melissa had wedged its back under the handle so firmly the wood had groaned. Yet at 3:12 a.m. the knob gave a patient twist, the metal clicked, and the chair scraped a slow inch across the carpet, as if tugged by a steady hand on the other side. She shook Greg awake with both palms. He came up wild-eyed, whispering, "What? What is it?" And then froze because he could hear it too. That delicate rattling, the faint tick of the lock testing itself. Greg slid out of bed and put a finger to his lips. He crept to the peephole and pressed his eye to it. The corridor beyond lay empty, bathing in the throb of low night lights. No footsteps, no shadow. He whispered, "No one's there." And when he turned the deadbolt back and forth, the handle didn't rattle because his hand had already filled it. The metal felt cold, wet. He stared at his fingertips in the emergency glow and saw a smear of salt water shine and then bead into droplets that should not have been on the inside of a locked door. "Get the kids," Melissa breathed. "Emily, honey." She crossed to the twins' beds, touching their hair. Emily mumbled and rolled. James snored softly into his pillow, oblivious. A drop hit Melissa's bare foot. She flinched. It was cold. Another drop. She looked up. Condensation clung to the ceiling in a long, dark strip above the door. Not the bathroom, not the air vent. The door. Drops gathered along the frame and fell with patient taps. Greg followed her gaze and swore under his breath, trying to laugh it off, failing. He dragged the chair closer, wedged it harder, pulled the security chain into place, then set his suitcase against the legs for weight. "It's bad weather in the ducks," he said, and they both pretended that made sense. At 3:19, the bathroom fan clicked on by itself. Melissa jolted. "Did you?" Greg shook his head. Steam breathed under the door, though no one had showered. The mirror thumped softly, once, twice, like a heartbeat in the wall. A whisper threaded the fan's hum. Not words, not quite. Wet and papery like pages turning underwater. Greg pushed the bathroom door with 2 fingers. It stuck, then gave. The mirror was fogged, dragging pale rivers down its face. Something had been traced there, then half wiped by the condensation. A circle with a short line beneath it like a keyhole drawn by a child. As they stared, a thin point appeared in the fog and slowly scraped another line into the glass from the inside, as if a finger were trapped behind it, carving its way outward. They backed into the main room without meaning to. The balcony door rattled in its track. Wind, Melissa told herself, just wind. But when she parted the curtain, the ocean beyond was flat as black stone, and the glass was wet on the inside, rivulets crawling down toward the lock. She watched one bead split and turn, tracing a tiny S across the frost before falling to the carpet with a sound she felt in her teeth. Greg's phone lit his face. He called the front desk. His voice came out thin, higher than he meant. He said locked, rattling, leaks and kids, and the voice on the other end said too smoothly that a steward would come at once. They waited, all 4 of them sitting on the bed now, their knees touching, eyes trained on the door as if watching it would anchor it. The peephole was a black dot in the center of everything, 3 minutes 5. Somewhere far in the belly of the ship, a pipe banged and banged again, marching toward them through the walls. The chair did another inch. So small, so certain. Emily whimpered. Melissa pulled her in tight. James sat up, confused, hair sticking up in soft blonde shocks, and whispered, "Mom." The ship answered with the soft slide of the chain moving in its track. They all saw it. The chain. It shifted left. A notch, then another. No hand on it. No hand at all. Greg lunged and clamped his fingers around the slider. The chain stopped. He looked at Melissa and tried a smile that didn't stay. "See," he said. "Just loose." "I've got it." The slider twitched under his pinch like a living thing, then stilled. A knock came from inside the closet. Not the door. Not the hall, the closet. 3 soft taps from behind the slatted wood, like someone politely requesting to be let out. The 3 knocks sank into the room like stones dropped in water. Everyone froze. Even the kids stopped breathing, their small bodies rigid against Melissa's chest. Greg kept his grip on the security chain, but his eyes slid toward the closet door, wide and wet in the dim red glow of the emergency lights. "Someone's in there," Melissa whispered. The words fell apart on her tongue. It made no sense. They had unpacked everything that first day, shirts, shoes, swimsuits, and the closet had been empty. Just a bar for hangers and the stale smell of wood polish. Greg shook his head too quickly, his lips tight. "No, no one's in there." His knuckles whitened on the chain. The sound came again. 3 slow knocks. The slats trembled as though a breath pressed against them from the other side. Melissa moved without thinking, clutching the children back toward the bed. Emily whimpered. James asked in a tiny voice, "Who is it?" Greg let go of the chain and stepped toward the closet. Each board in the floor creaked beneath his weight, louder than it should have been, like the ship itself was listening. He wrapped his hand around the knob, then stopped. The metal was damp, slick with condensation. He wiped his palm on his shorts, tried again, and the knob slipped under his touch like skin slicked with seawater. The ship groaned, a long moan that seemed to crawl through the bones of the cabin. The lights above the door flickered. Melissa begged in a hoarse whisper, "Don't open it." The 3rd set of knocks came. Not polite this time, harder, angrier. The slats bulged as if something pressed from within. And then silence. Greg backed away. He grabbed his phone again, but now it was dead. The battery drained, though it had been nearly full. Melissa's was the same. No signal, no glow. Just black screens reflecting their pale faces. That's when the closet door creaked open. Only an inch. Maybe less, but enough to see. Inside the dark space, 2 pale fingers curled around the edge of the door frame. They dripped seawater onto the carpet, each drop falling with obscene clarity. The fingers flexed once, twice, then retreated back into shadow. The closet door shut with a quiet final click. No one spoke until morning. They sat awake on the bed together, clinging to the faint glow creeping in from the balcony glass. When a steward finally arrived, hours later than promised, he found the family pale, sleepless, their belongings half-packed. Greg demanded a new room. Melissa begged. The steward didn't argue. He only lowered his gaze to the number stenciled on the cabin door. Cabin 616. Later, after they were moved, Greg swore he saw a light on under the door of their old cabin, though no one had checked in after them. And Melissa, days later when she unpacked at home, opened her suitcase to find the hem of her daughter's dress soaked through. The smell of salt water filled the room. Cabin 616 remains in the records, still listed, still booked by passengers who don't know the story. And sometimes, late at night, guests swear they hear 3 slow knocks, coming not from the hallway but from the inside of their closets. He arrived alone, a quiet man with a single black suitcase and a ticket bought in cash. The cruise manifest listed him as Robert Lane, mid-40s, a traveler with no forwarding address and no emergency contacts, the kind of passenger who slipped on board without leaving much behind. The staff at check-in remembered him only because of his eyes, pale, restless, scanning the atrium as if measuring the ship itself. Robert was assigned cabin 533, a narrow room with a porthole that looked out over the endless black water. Neighbors later recalled hearing nothing from him. No television, no music, no conversations drifting through the thin walls. Each evening his "Do Not Disturb" sign hung on the handle, and by morning the steward found the bed made, the room immaculate, as if no one had slept there. On the 5th day of the voyage, he vanished. The steward found the door ajar, the sign still hanging, the bed tucked with military precision. Robert's suitcase sat in the corner, his clothes folded neatly inside. His wallet and passport were still in the drawer. But Robert Lane himself was gone. The cameras showed him returning to his cabin at 11:47 p.m. the night before. He walked calmly down the corridor, his head bowed, his suitcase in hand. He slid the keycard, stepped inside, and closed the door. After that, nothing. The cameras never showed him leaving. The crew searched the cabin. No broken locks, no tampered window, no sign of struggle. The porthole was sealed shut. The steward swore he had cleaned the bathroom that morning and found the towels untouched, the mirror spotless, the drain clear. And yet, when investigators arrived, they discovered something he had missed. The mirror above the sink was fogged, though no hot water had been run. Across the glass, written in a finger's trace, were words that hadn't been there hours earlier. Not checked out. The message smudged when they touched it, the condensation fresh as if written moments before. But the cabin was empty. Passengers grew uneasy as the story spread. Some whispered Robert had never existed at all, that the name was fake, that the man had been a shadow passing through the ship. Others swore they saw him after he disappeared, standing at the end of the corridor at night, still holding his suitcase, waiting as if the voyage had never ended for him. And one woman, staying 2 doors down, told her story only once. She claimed that at 3 a.m., the night Robert vanished, she woke to the sound of a keycard sliding into her door. The lock clicked, the handle turned, but the door never opened. When she pressed her eye to the peephole, she saw Robert standing there, suitcase in hand, staring at the door with those pale, restless eyes. She blinked, and he was gone. Cabin 533 was sealed after Robert's disappearance. The captain ordered the door locked, the room stripped, the linens burned. Passengers whispered as they passed in the corridor, craning their necks at the metal door with its heavy latch. But the lock did little to quiet the unease. On the 6th night, a stewardess assigned to another deck claimed she saw Robert in the stairwell. She described him in detail. The same pale eyes, the same suitcase clutched in his hand. He stood motionless on the landing, staring upward. When she blinked, he was gone. She swore she hadn't imagined it, swore she smelled salt water in the stairwell long after he vanished. By the 7th day, Robert Lane's name disappeared from the manifest. Officially, there was no record of him ever boarding. The staff were told to stop discussing him, to reassure passengers that all guests were accounted for. But the system didn't agree. Each morning when the computer logged the passenger roll, Robert's name reappeared. His keycard number flashed active, always marking cabin 533. And when the purser tried to delete him manually, the system froze, lights flickering across the screen. Before rebooting with the name still intact, passengers started reporting the knock. 3 sharp raps at their doors between midnight and 3 a.m. Always 3, always steady. When they looked through the peephole, they saw nothing. But more than one guest swore they found a wet footprint outside their door, large and bare, slowly fading as they watched. One couple, staying across from 533, told investigators something worse. At 2:15 a.m., they were jolted awake by the sound of luggage wheels dragging across the carpet outside. The husband opened the door to find the hallway empty, but the sound continued, echoing faintly as if someone were walking the length of the corridor with a suitcase that no longer touched the ground. When they reported it to the crew, they were brushed off. But the next morning when they passed cabin 533, the door stood wide open. Against orders, the husband stepped inside. The bed was made, the mirror wiped clean, the bathroom dry. Everything pristine. But sitting in the chair by the desk was Robert's suitcase. Neatly zipped, waiting. The husband swore it hadn't been there before. When security arrived minutes later, the suitcase was gone. By the 10th night, the ship felt heavier, as though something unseen dragged at its hull. Crew whispered in corners, avoiding cabin 533 even when ordered. The captain insisted the room stay sealed, but guests continued to report lights flickering in that section of the corridor, shadows moving beneath the door, the faint scrape of wheels rolling against the carpet when no one was there. The computer system grew worse. Every morning, Robert Lane's name appeared on the manifest, not just once, but twice. Then 3 times. By the 12th day, his name filled entire pages, line after line, each linked to cabin 533. When staff tried to override it, the printer spat out the same words until the ink ran dry. Checked in. Not checked out. Passengers began seeing him in places that cameras swore were empty. In the reflection of elevator doors. In the dark of stairwells. One man swore Robert sat in the dining hall one morning, suitcase propped against his chair, staring silently at a plate of untouched food. When security rushed in, the chair was empty, but salt water dripped from the cushion onto the floor. The final night of that voyage, the couple across from cabin 533 woke to the sound of the door across the hall clicking open. The husband crept to the peephole and looked. Robert stood there, suitcase in hand, pale eyes fixed on nothing, his expression calm and unblinking. Then slowly he turned toward their door. The husband stumbled back, heart pounding as the knock came. 3 sharp raps. Then silence. When he dared to look again, the hall was empty. But their lock light glowed red as if someone had swiped a card. The ship docked the next morning. Passengers disembarked quickly, eager to leave the unease behind. But when the crew checked cabin 533 one last time, they found the bed made, the desk cleared, and sitting neatly on the chair as though waiting for its owner, was the black suitcase. The crew carried it off down the gangway to be catalogued and stored. But by the time it reached the port authority's desk, it was empty. No clothes, no passport, nothing but a folded slip of paper. On it, in handwriting no one could trace, were the words "checked in, still here." And when the ship sailed again a week later, cabin 533 was assigned to a new passenger. The steward swore he left the room spotless. But when the guest unlocked the door for the first time, the suitcase was already waiting inside.